Hi guys, so today's lesson is on GDP. So GDP is one out of the three major macroeconomic indicators. So when an economist or a person is trying to figure out the health of an economy, a macroeconomy, so an economy of an entire country, gross domestic product is one of the major things they're going to look at, along with inflation and unemployment. So these are just some examples of headlines in the news, right, that really indicate how important GDP is. So US growth revised up, but year-end slowdown is feared. US economy expanded slightly in the fourth quarter. Whenever you see something like this, it's usually concerned with GDP. So when they say that the economy is going really well, or the economy is slowing down, or it's growing or it's shrinking, they're referring to gross domestic product. That's the major indicator. So economic growth is considered a sustained rise in a nation's production of goods and services over time. So what I want you to do right now is I want you to pause this video and read the attached reading called GDP Doesn't Measure Up. You're also going to answer the questions at the bottom of your reading. So you can go ahead and pause and complete that. Okay, so GDP is referring to the total market value of all final goods and services produced within a country's borders within a 12-month period. So this is really discussing how many goods are being produced and how many goods are being bought. So if an economy is growing, you can assume that more goods are being produced and more goods are being bought. If it's slowing down, you're not producing goods as quickly, or maybe you're even you have some negative production. That would be like a depression or a recession. There are some important things though that are not included in GDP. The first thing would be intermediate products, goods that are used to make other products that are already counted in GDP. So this would be, for example, tires on a new car. The new car will be counted in the GDP. However, the tires on the new car will not be counted. But if I have a new car and I go buy new tires apart from that new car, those tires will be counted. So any product that is used to make another product that's already counted will not be counted. Secondhand sales are also not counted. So if you go to like a Goodwill and you're spending money, or a secondhand clothing store, that money is not counted in the GDP. Non-market transactions are also not counted. So for example, a lot of people do labor that for themselves. So for example, when you mow your own lawn, that's not counted. If you hired a gardener to come mow your lawn, that would be counted in GDP. But if you're not spending money and you're still doing that same job, it's not counted. And then the last thing that isn't counted is underground economy. So this would be like smuggling, prostitution, drugs. That is also not counted in the GDP. There is a difference, and an important difference though, between nominal GDP and real GDP. Nominal GDP is the term we use to refer to the standard GDP. This nominal GDP can appear to increase as prices increase, so something called inflation. So as things get more and more expensive over time, it can appear as though GDP is increasing, even though there's actually not an increase in the amount of goods being produced or sold. Prices are just getting more expensive. So in order to counteract that, economists use something called the real GDP. Real GDP is adjusted for inflation so that economists can actually see, is the economy growing, or are things just getting more expensive? So this is an example of this. So if we compare year 1 and year 2 with our nominal GDP, if we look down here, the total, it appears as though the GDP has increased by around $500. But when we adjust year 2 for inflation, right, we actually see that the GDP is really just $890, which is an increase of only about $300 in real life. So this is why understanding the difference between nominal and real GDP is so important when we're comparing and actually looking for growth over time. But there are some important things that GDP doesn't tell us. It doesn't tell us the types of products that are being sold, the quality of life of the people of the country, non-market activities, so for example, stay-at-home parents, things like that, or if there's any been improvement in the quality of products that are being produced. There are some other important measures that I want to get into as well that help economists understand national income and growth. So one is GDP per capita. This is when real GDP is divided by a population. So you get to see more of a standard of living when we look at GDP per capita. How much money is each person kind of generating or benefiting from? And then you have the gross national product. This is the value of goods and services produced by labor and property supplied by U.S. residents regardless of where they live. So this would be like all the U.S. companies, even though they might be outside of the U.S., they're still bringing value into the U.S. So gross national product takes that into account. You also have personal income. So this is the amount of income a person has before individual taxes. And then you can also look at the disposable personal income. This would be the amount of money after taxes. So that's actually what people are able to spend. So this is a graph that shows, GDP. The generalizations we can make about the US over this time is really that the GDP and the economy of the US has really been growing. And you can see these little shaded areas right here on the graph. These are recessions. So you can see a recession is when there is a fall in GDP. You can see that our line is going down. 2008 was a really dramatic fall in GDP. That was the Great Recession. But over time, right, it has been continuously increasing. So if we look at this example, right off the bat, it would appear that country C is better off because they overall have a higher GDP. But when we throw population into it, we can calculate GDP per capita. And in actuality, we see that country A, although it has a smaller GDP, it has a lower population. So each person actually has access to more money. That's not to say that there isn't still wealth inequality within that country, but overall, we can assume that country A's population is better off. Here's a map that shows GDP globally. So you can see there are areas of the world that have a really high GDP that are larger, right? The US, Mexico, Europe is obviously disproportionately large on this map. It has a really high GDP, especially England, right? England's a teeny tiny little nation. Africa, largest continent on the world, but has a really small GDP, especially the Central African area. China's GDP huge. And so this map kind of shows us, where are people really well off and then where are people less well off. So what you're going to do now is you are going to complete the exit ticket that is attached to this assignment on the Google Classroom. I'll see you next time.